What's up, heroes, and welcome to the Producer Life Podcast, episode 95. Before we get started, I've got a couple of quick announcements. First, on March 1st, the Human Music Podcast has an episode coming out where I got interviewed. It felt pretty weird being the one on the receiving end of the questions, but it was a lot of fun. Make sure to check that out. You can find them at thehumanmusicpodcast.com. I'm kind of on a roll this year producing new music. I released my first explicit track called Fuck Susie on the 11th of this month. It's an electro house piece about our favorite robocaller, Susie. You know who I'm talking about.
Hi, this is Susie calling with the Vehicle Service Department.
Anyway, I'll have a link in the show notes page. I've got a much happier house track coming out on March 1st called Arigato, which features a traditional Japanese koto, accompanied by house music chords, Asian percussion, and a funky bass line. I'll have a sneak preview for you at the end of the show, so make sure you listen through to the end and then pre-save the track from the link on the show notes page. Just look for producerlifepodcast.com, episode 95. And now, today we're going to welcome back Sean Giovanni. Gio is a producer, audio engineer, and the multi-talented owner of the record shop in Nashville, Tennessee. During his career, Gio has worked with big acts and labels to include Alabama, John Legend, Lil Jon, Meatloaf, Sister Hazel, the Wallflowers, Sony Music, Warner Music Group, Universal, and a bunch more. If you missed Gio's first interview, make sure to check out episode 66, where he talked about how he got his start, overcoming adversity, and his process for working with clients at the record shop. In today's episode, we focus on some of his recent initiatives. Gio's been doing some really innovative stuff to broaden the record shop's offerings, to include helping artists with professional live streaming and social media content creation. He also offers tips for better storytelling in your songwriting, and he walks us through his basic mixing process. But first, cue the intro music.
This is the Producer Life Podcast with your host, the House Ninja. Bringing you actionable ideas to improve your music and get it heard.
All right, Gio, welcome back to the Producer Life Podcast.
Great to be here, man. Thanks for having me back.
For people that haven't heard episode 66, that's when you were last on last April. Give us a quick just overview of what you do with the record shop and what sort of services you provide, and a brief sort of synopsis of what you guys are all about.
Absolutely. Well, welcome. My name's Giovanni. I'm a sonic storyteller, and I own a studio called The Record Shop that's based in Nashville, Tennessee. We're a multimedia production company that helps artists achieve their artistic vision in a wide variety of different ways. Most of the work that I personally focus on is record production, but as a company, we also help artists with visual production, with live broadcast, with remote recording, as well as developing marketing content and just content in general, and multimedia assets to help them build their brand and get their art out to the world.
Okay, that was fantastic. You've done that a few times. So as I was listening to that, though, I feel like, and I was listening to the original episode earlier today, I feel like you are placing much more emphasis on the multimedia end of things. I don't remember you using that kind of word when we were talking about the studio before. Is that sort of reflective of sort of a broader direction you're taking the studio?
That's always been stuff that I've been involved in, but for a long period of time, I was more involved from a project manager standpoint, where I would be working on a project as a producer with an artist and then refer them to someone within my circle that I felt like would be a good fit to work with them on that side of things. And in some cases, I would get involved in the creative side, but a lot of times I would just bring someone on to help out with that aspect. One of the big changes that happened during COVID and has continued to grow since then over the past couple of years has been getting more in-house with the video aspect of things that we do. And that stemmed out of us trying to create a new resource for artists to do live stream shows and broadcasts from the studio. So we talked about that a little bit. I was just getting started with it back then. And right away, it really took off on the performance side of things, where artists could live stream really high quality audio and visual concerts from a studio environment. But a few of the really interesting things that stemmed out of that One of them was that we connected with a really cool company called Song Division that provides music experiences for corporate events. And before COVID, they, similarly to us, they were doing stuff on location. So they would go out to the conference, and their team would work in different groups with the employees on different exercises that were team building exercises for the most part, built around the music process. So some cases they might write a theme song for the company with different groups of employees, and the team would work together to create that music. Well, COVID happened and all these events started going online, and that business really, and during that time, that business really grew. So we were able to come in and support them with providing a live stream facility for them to be able to do really high quality events. And their clients loved it, and it turned into a great thing. So we were able to expand with having this equipment and resources and facility to do it. We were able to expand into a much wider range of content creation than I thought that we would initially, because my initial focus was just really on artist performances. So then we started doing podcasts, hosting podcasts, so then we started hosting podcasts and doing things like workshops and virtual mixers and stuff where people would come in and give presentations and that kind of thing. We did a couple things with some churches, and it just it expanded really quickly, and it's been a lot of fun to do.
That's fantastic. And so tell me, in Nashville right now, where you are, I mean, is the pandemic and pandemic restrictions, are they kind of waning where you can get back to normal? And is the online business, the podcasting, the live streaming, is that continuing strong even as the pandemic is receding?
Yeah, I mean, for the most part, Nashville was pretty laid back with, restrictions. There was a short period of time where things got shut down a bit. But for the most part, on the recording industry side of things, nothing really slowed down. If anything, our business grew because more artists wanted to be in the studio creating, and there wasn't any kind of slow time during like touring season and that sort of thing. I mean, things just kind of kept flowing. So we were very fortunate in that aspect. As artists have started to go out on the road and as events have started to happen in person, I think one of the things that some event organizers have recognized is that there's some advantages to the virtual side of things. And so there's still very substantial events that are being put together in that virtual world. And in some cases, with one event that we did, it was an in-person event, but also had a virtual aspect to it for people that couldn't attend. So I think that that's something that will absolutely continue on, because now you can expand your audience, whether that's a show or a conference or an event, where if someone can't make it there, they can view it online and be a part of it that way.
Yeah, it seems like it is the ultimate in scalability. I was visiting my parents a little while ago, and they offered to take me to an opera, which was being streamed. It was the Met Opera, and it was being streamed at movie theaters. And I think there were 3 of us in the audience, and we thought, wow, this is, how does that work for them? But they said there were 120,000 people watching all over the planet, which obviously would not fit in their theater. But, you look at that ability to scale up around the planet using live streaming, and it's just a phenomenal opportunity. It makes sense to take your hard work and make it available globally.
Absolutely. And another thing that stemmed out of that was we started to recognize, now we have this situation set up with multiple cameras and an ability to switch between those angles live. And we started experimenting with doing content creation days where we would bring an artist in, and we might do some like sit down interview style, like short form video stuff for like Instagram and TikTok. And then we could do like a full acoustic performance of a song. They could have a portion of the day where they brought a band in and did like full band, live sessions, and we could film it all and record it all, and all of it could be edited for the most part on the spot. So we were able to create a really effective way to be able to batch create a bunch of content in a way that is pretty economical for an artist that's always trying to create new stuff to share, new ways to stay engaged with their artists. So that's become a new thing that really was just a idea that stemmed out of, now that we have these tools at our disposal, how else can we use them to be valuable to artists. And that's been really helpful.
That's a terrific idea. Yeah. Tell me, let's focus on the live streaming for a minute. Tell me sort of, this is something that came about a year and a half, 2 years ago. What are some of the lessons you've learned moving from sort of your early phases of live streaming to the production capabilities that you've got today?
Well, I would say one of the lessons that I guess I had learned before this, but I think was really important that I learned, was to not try to do everything yourself, to be the expert at the thing that you're an expert at, and find the right people to surround yourself with that can be an expert at those other things that you're not an expert at, and work with a team to be able to help make something happen. And that can be done in a variety of ways within a new endeavor. But in this specific thing, I recognize that while I could get my way around a camera, and I understand editing and I understand signal flow and equipment well enough to kind of figure out how a device works, videography and directing a broadcast is not my profession. So I found someone who did do that as a profession, and fortunately I found him at a time where he was just launching a new business, and he was really eager to be able to jump in with our team and become our go-to director for these events. So it was a really fortunate thing that I met him at the time when this sort of all happened. But from the get-go, my focus was to discover who that person would be for our team to be able to help everything run smoothly, and for me to be able to still keep a priority on what I love doing the most, which is producing records and handling the audio side of these different types of content creation.
Sure. So I suspect that most of my listeners, their live streaming setups for the pandemic were probably webcams, maybe a digital SLR, OBS, maybe a green screen, hopefully some decent lighting, but nothing fancy. So you're talking about using a team. How many people are you using on the professional end, and what does your setup look like in terms of equipment and I guess the physical space that you use for the live stream?
Well, the size of the crew depends upon the size of the production, and how much talent is in the frame. Is it a full band? Is that band a 3-piece band or a 6-piece band? And what type of performance is it? Is it a group of people just having a conversation in like a workshop sort of setting, or is it a live performance with musicians? So the crew can range from 2 people to 5 people, probably depending upon the size of the production. The equipment that we went with was Blackmagic cameras, a variety of different lenses, some wide angle lenses, some tighter lenses, and then we started getting some cameras on sliders. There's some pretty affordable options for that out there. You could go on Amazon and find some, and so that's what we started with. But we found that equipment didn't last very long. And so I quickly learned another lesson about the importance of just making a little bit of that extra investment where you can, to think more long-term into it. I did that with cameras, but when I started thinking about the accessories, I thought, well, let's just get like an entry-level thing, to start with. And it was great to begin. But I found that once that piece broke and the controller for it that went out cost more than the device itself, if I wanted to replace it, then we started investing into higher quality aspects of the accessories, like the lighting and sliders and that sort of thing. Then we incorporated a jib, which is like a crane that can slide the camera pretty high up in the air and get smooth movements through, and some steady cam setups where the camera operator can have the camera like up on their shoulders and it stays steady and they can walk around with it. But for someone that's just getting into it, it's not. We wanted to be able to have that level of equipment in order to be able to take on higher level projects and scale what we were doing. And I'm fortunate to be in a position where those relationships are there, where I can put the word out and put the team together. And fortunately, those projects, just started rolling in. But that definitely came from years and years of building, relationships and then kind of knowing who to call to give the good word that we were offering this sort of thing. But if I was just getting started with that and didn't have that same sort of network and facility to be able to integrate all of this stuff into, there's some, I would start with investing in a little bit of a higher end camera. In some cases, getting a higher end lens can make a mid-grade camera have a better picture quality. I would do some research on understanding just basic lighting techniques. Just getting a couple basic key lights as opposed to just using the natural light in your room and adjusting your camera to work with it can really make a huge difference on the picture quality. And having a couple different camera angles, if it's possible, can definitely help. And Blackmagic is a great company that has all these different accessories, and they go from a pretty low budget range to the higher like professional grade range. But all of their products are well built and work well. They have a small switcher that they build that you can just kind of put on your desk, and it allows you to jump between different cameras pretty easily. So it's something where you could stream and move it in between that. It also has the audio hooked up with it, and then it's just one cable that you plug into the computer. So another suggestion would be to have a device like that, or any sort of device where you can have an external microphone that's connected with the camera, and then you just have maybe a capture card, a little USB device that you plug into your computer, and it gets the audio and video signal sent in there. I think people would initially just start with like a cell phone and using the audio on there. It can work okay in the right environment maybe, but if you want to step your game up a little bit, getting a microphone and getting a device so you can run those signals together can definitely help, improving the audio quality and improving the visual quality. There's a lot of great products out there that aren't a gigantic investment to jump into to make a difference. And I think that if you're just doing this on your own as an artist, the qualities, will definitely help. The talent's got to be there, and you got to be doing something that's entertaining, obviously at a foundation. But if your quality's, better, I think people are going to watch a little bit longer, pay a little bit more attention, as long as that's combined with something that's, an engaging, performance. If you're someone that is trying to maybe expand your production company to be able to include this sort of thing or offer it to artists, well, then, having better quality is going to help set yourself apart in that way. And just asking yourself, is there a level up from where I'm thinking budget wise that I could figure out a way to work towards in order to improve it, rather than just trying to work with what you have. But if you're in a position where you got to work with what you have, then try to get creative. Go on YouTube and find some DIY suggestions for how to up the quality of something without necessarily having to up your gear. I think just doing the research and finding the system that works best for you is definitely a good place to start.
Yeah. And I really like the way that once you have better gear, you've looked for opportunities to use that in a variety of ways. So, with the videography and whatnot, I was really interested. I saw on your Facebook page that you have been helping with Crank It Up TV. And so it's almost like you're becoming a video production studio in addition to the, I guess, more traditional audio role that a studio would have. Can you talk about what you've done with Crank It Up TV and sort of how you've leveraged the equipment and the experience that you have?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, to take it back a little bit, when I first moved to Nashville and I wasn't able to get a job in a studio, I started working around freelance in town. And eventually I was able to get a part-time gig at a voiceover studio. And so what my job was as the engineer was to record vocal talent doing prompts for telephone answering systems. So like if you called your cable company and needed to pay your bill and they say, press 1 for this and press 2 for this. I sat there, had, a few hours a week recording people reading those prompts. It's pretty crazy because you hear those things and you don't really think about like somebody got paid to say that and record it and then edit it and get it all in that system. And so that was my first job where I was actually hired by a studio to do work as opposed to, freelance thing. And I mentioned that because it introduced me to a different side of audio that I hadn't really thought about as even like being an option. And it also helped me focus on more as opposed to like the creative technical side of shaping sounds and kind of creating new things and building out an arrangement with the song. I had to focus on very pristine, focused enunciation, words, decibel level, making sure that certain specifications are correct within the audio files, understanding conversion, that sort of thing. And so it was a good foundation for some of the opportunities that came later on for me to be able to get to a point where I could handle audio for a network television show. Even though my focus had always been on, just producing records. The next thing that happened a little bit later on was I had met a gentleman who was creating an app where celebrities would teach whatever their skill set was. So we do it with professional athletes and musicians, cooks, just all kinds of different people, kind of similar to how Masterclass developed. And
okay. I was thinking it sounded like Masterclass a lot.
Yeah. So it was an early version of that type of approach to education. And it was at a time where I wasn't working full time yet in audio, and I was just really looking for any gig that I could get. And the opportunity came up, and it sounded like a lot of fun to be able to travel around and meet some pro athletes and musicians and dive into this side of things. And I had enough knowledge with video editing and remote audio capture to be able to handle the gig. And so through that, I got very proficient at recording interviews, blending in background music, building out captions, and then editing the video content for it. And so that was a good education in that. And then a little bit later on, I was asked to produce the theme song for a documentary. And after doing that, the producer at the very end of post-production, his audio editor got a gig on a big film and had to bail. And so last minute, he needed somebody to help him finish the dialogue replacement and mixing of the dialogue replacement into the rest of the audio bed for the documentary. And so I said, absolutely, I'll do that. That sounds like a fun, interesting thing. And so I immediately went online and started doing research on how to do this properly and trying to learn all the specifications and terminology and stuff. And so through that, I learned a lot about broadcast delivery specs, how to master a audio bed for a film or for a visual release for distribution. And that experience was really helpful, in preparing. So those three things led up to me being comfortable within that environment. And then every once in a while, just through, you work with one person, another person, and then a lot of times it's when these sort of things come up. So the Crank It Up Garage show came up the same way. They had filmed it and they were getting ready to release it pretty quickly. And they needed help on the audio editing side. And I had like a couple days to mix the first episode before it aired. So they just said, hey, is this something that you've done before? And fortunately, it was something that I had said yes to experimenting with before. And so this was really my moment to be able to jump into it at a much higher, national TV, broadcast level. And the opportunity came through a relationship that I had with an artist, Big and Rich. They're a big country group, and Big Kenny is one of the hosts of the show, and their co-manager Charlie Panaccio is the other host of the show. And so Charlie called and said, "Hey man, we're in a bind. We need this audio put together. Can you help me out?" I said, "Absolutely. Let's make it happen." So I had that relationship there already, but I wouldn't have been able to say yes to that had I not jumped at these little opportunities early on in my career that weren't necessarily what my focus was, but that I knew that by expanding my knowledge and skill set, at some point it could be valuable. So fortunately I was, ready for it and able to do it. And it was a lot of fun to work on. I would highly recommend watching the show. It's so cool. They travel around and find custom cars, and there's a lot of shows about car builds and that sort of thing. But what I love about their show is that they tell the story about the passion behind why someone did it. So you learn a lot about not only the vehicle itself, but what inspired it and the impact that story can have on people. And I just love storytelling and people finding their purpose and being able to live out their purpose through really fun, endeavors like that. So it checked every box for me. So I was all about doing it.
Okay. Yeah, that does sound like fun. I was looking at one of the ads for it, and it talked about what happens when you attach a rocket engine to an Amish buggy, which
yeah,
I may have to try to go find that.
And that thing is insane. There's a jet engine on the back of an Amish buggy, and they flew the thing around this like airport runway. It was so loud. It's crazy.
Oh my gosh. All right. So that's awesome. So is that something you are actively marketing now with the record shop to help with, I don't know what the correct terminology is, but sort of audio post-production for movies or TV shows?
I would say it's something that I have the capability to help with, but it's not something that I'm necessarily the most passionate about. So if the right project comes along and it's something that I can be a helpful asset for, then I'm absolutely up for doing it. But it's not necessarily something that I'm trying to expand into yet another thing that we offer. I do think it's important to have those few things that you can have your focus on and not spread yourself too thin with trying to manage being decent at doing, a bunch of different things. So I know the people that work in that world, full time, that's their thing, that's all they do. My thing is producing records, but it's a lot of fun to do new things, and different things from time to time. So it's something that I'm open to and I can help with, but I think for the most part, those opportunities will continue to come just through, the folks that I work with and that. But I think it's important to mention that when you're presented with that sort of opportunity, and this happened with me also with sync licensing for film and TV, where I got some great opportunities to get to produce some songs that ended up in some big movies. And I really enjoyed that process. But as I got more into it, I recognized this isn't necessarily what I want to be doing every day. So I'll be open to it if the opportunity comes along. But the things that I'm actively pursuing are producing records and helping to create content for artists to promote those records.
Okay. Well, I definitely want to circle back to the record production and I kind of want to talk about storytelling because that's something that, you highlighted a minute ago. But before we do that, I did want to ask one more question about a Facebook post from last summer. You are very involved with all sorts of community projects and ways to promote the business, but also to, give back to the music community. And it looks like last summer you judged a beat battle for producers. And obviously that's of interest to the audience that's listening today. Can you talk a little bit about that beat battle and how that worked and what your role was as judge?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that battle was put on by a organization called Nashville is Not Just Country, which is a really great organization that puts a spotlight on artists in Nashville that are not country. And one of the events that they host is a beat battle. So the founder of that organization asked me if I wanted to come on and be a judge for it. I said, absolutely. I'd love to, support the community in that way. And through the process, it was really cool to be able to meet different beat producers that I hadn't met before that were in town. There were a number of really young ones as well. I think the youngest one might have been like 10 years old. And that was cool to see. That was a really inspiring thing to see him there with his parents and him battling against these adults. And it took me back to my early days of falling in love with music, being really young and not necessarily having a ton of people around me that were doing the same thing. And so also being kind of thrown into a little bit of an older environment to be able to learn from. And I think one of the great things about finding ways to be able to give back to your community outside of just the support that comes from it is the inspiration that can come, especially when it's a youth-driven thing. I do a lot of work with the Recording Academy with their Grammy U program and Grammy Camp. Grammy Camp is for high school students. Grammy U is for college students. And that also, while my intention is just to share what I can to be able to help mentor people that are passionate about making a career in this industry, I also get a lot out of it just through being inspired by their drive and, and passion. When we get into doing something where it becomes, your job, it never really feels like work to me, but without keeping that perspective, I would assume that it could become pretty easy to just sort of get complacent or forget sort of how blessed we are to be able to just hang out and make music for a living. So being in those environments really helped give me a strong perspective, and it's really inspiring to be able to go back to work the next day and just keep being able to pursue that dream that started when I was really young.
That's fantastic. So it recharges you in addition to helping support the community.
Absolutely.
Your core focus is on producing records. That's sort of the core of your business. And you talked about how much you love storytelling, and you've talked a little bit about arranging songs. Can you talk to us a little bit about the role of storytelling in good songwriting? And maybe if you have any ideas or thoughts about how that might apply to electronic music, for example.
Absolutely. Well, with music in general, I think with songwriting, if there's lyrics involved, one of the strongest practices that I think applies to the idea behind telling the story is the concept of showing instead of telling through a lyric. So the idea of thinking about what is this lyric, and by reading it, am I just saying very plainly and verbatim what I mean, or am I showing it through some sort of metaphor, imagery, or explanation that takes the listener to that place? So when we're thinking about songwriting from a lyrical standpoint, I think that that's a really helpful practice and a good exercise for songwriters to go through to read through their lyrics from that perspective and ask, is this painting a clearer picture? And I think if you look at, legendary songs, timeless songs, really successful songwriting, for the most part, you'll find a pretty consistent use of that practice within the lyrical writing of things. When I'm focusing on things from a sonic storytelling standpoint, I'm listening to the lyric, the story, and I'm imagining the environment in which this story exists. And so if that's partying in a club and going hard, that's great. That's an environment. And I'm going to imagine that club. I'm going to imagine the bottles coming to the table and everybody dancing and the energy, the lights all over. And I want the music to feel like it has that type of movement. If it's a song that's about, a sad story or something, that might be a different environment. So I kind of paint a picture in my mind about the music video, and I'm kind of imagining it as I'm thinking about the instrumentation and the parts and putting together the sounds. And that's a lot of what leads, the tonality of it. So if something is a more somber, more mellow sort of vibe, I may be using some darker sounds, some things that have a little bit more edge to them. If it's a sound design thing, I'm probably going to be cutting more top end than I am adding stuff, to certain things to make it feel a little bit darker than brighter. Using a lot of saturation and like subtle distortion to things to give it a little bit of an edge. Just experimenting with the sound and trying to shape it so it feels like the mood of the track. And then I think from an arrangement standpoint, the other thing that I think about with storytelling is the dynamics of a song. So is the energy of the song something that is going, pedal to the metal from the beginning? Are we coming in with the beat, hard and knocking, and it just continues on because that's the energy that it has? Or is this intended to be something that kind of starts from an introduction and then builds into something, into a climax, and then comes back down to some reflection and then builds back up to take you on and ride out through the sunset, So I think about dynamics in that way. Is the beat going to drop out at some point? Is everything going to get filtered out and then open back up? And I also think about that a lot with transitions when I'm thinking about how the sound is telling the story. Is this next section supposed to be bigger and more anthemic than the previous one? If so, what can I do to create a setup for that? Does it mean that I'm going to drop something out right before that comes in order to make that next section feel bigger, which is a great trick to be able to add energy and dynamic to something without necessarily adding something new? Or is there a fill or some sort of new sound that needs to be entered there? Or is there a melodic hook that's going to come in that's going to say, hey, I want you to listen to me now because I got something important, to say. The section before that was just setting you up for this, for this moment. So I try to find those little moments within a production And when I'm building a track out, I'm just listening to it over and over and continuing to paint that picture in my mind of what this song is supposed to say and what story is being told with the sounds, and making sure that everything is there so all those moments, are happening. And once I have the foundation of the track, then I'm going back through and listening for those little sort of ear candy things that might support something that's being said. So if there's a certain lyric that has a certain energy to it that might be different than the one before, is there a little like weird, quirky sound that I could put in there that's almost like a sound effect that you would hear in a movie that would support whatever's being said, or create some more suspense or drama or energy or aggression or something like that. So I'm always trying to find little clever ways to not necessarily take up a lot of space, allow the foundation to be what it is, make sure that you have a strong foundation with the groove, that there's a really clear, progression, that there's a good motif or hook that's running through the different sections of the song. But then what are the other little pieces, the little ear candy that I can drop in to just give it a little flavor, here and there. And I would say that then within that process, I'm also thinking about where things are placed within the mix. So panning wise, and are those things moving throughout the track? One thing that I like doing a lot if I'm trying to create a dynamic impact on a certain section is taking the things that are kind of spread wide in the track and bringing them in towards the center for a section that's happening before a big section is supposed to happen, and then automating that panning to open up when that big section happens. So it feels like the track just kind of explodes and gets wider in that point in the song. So just thinking about how the sound can be shaped and then arranged and then adjusted and automated as a track progressed to be able to make sure that every moment is staying in line with that story that's being told.
Do you, talking about that last trick of bringing elements in before a moment where everything is supposed to open up, are you moving individual instruments and tracks in, or are you just kind of automating the overall width of the track down to be more narrow before, say, the drop of a song?
I think it would depend on the style of music, but most of the music that I work in is like top 40 mainstream music within pop, hip hop, gospel, country, and R&B. So within those genres, there's usually going to be some things that are living out wide, maybe room mics on drums or something that's creating ambience. So I don't necessarily want to have like the whole track do that, but one example might be like taking the guitars or taking like the synth or something like that and keeping it more panned in until you get to that section. I would say in general, I'm going to do it based on individual tracks and trying to create that movement. But if it was something that was a remix that I was doing where I might be working with like stems and it's more of a instrumental based thing, then it could make sense to just do it on the whole, track itself.
Okay. That was a great rundown. And I really like the way that you described sort of visualizing the music video to look at the story that an instrumental is telling, even if there isn't an intent to create a music video later on, picturing it in your head to help you figure out elements and instruments and how you're going to mix. So I guess I'm curious, you do this professionally. What are your go-to plugins and do you have a set number of tools that you commonly go to? I think you use Pro Tools, correct?
Pro Tools is the main DAW that I use. I kind of use them all for varying reasons. It depends, but everything usually ends up in Pro Tools. I prefer to mix in Pro Tools, and I prefer to edit audio in Pro Tools. I think that those are, at least the audio editing is just kind of significantly better, in my opinion, in Pro Tools, and I can work really fast in there as well. But I get some things from producers where they do everything in Logic and they want it to stay in Logic. I had a track the other day that was mixed in Ableton, and they wanted me to help them with just like final mix revisions to help them get it across the finish line. And there's an artist that records here a lot but mixes themselves. So I'm happy to work in their platform if it's what they prefer. I did a virtual mix through Studio One the other day where someone was in another state, and wanted and a similar thing where like they mix their stuff themselves, but they wanted some help, finishing it out. So I do some, I don't know, mix consulting like that, I guess, to be able to help artists that we're working with be able to do better work, at home and on their own. But in general, yeah, I work in Pro Tools. I really look at all the software as just, different tools that you can pull from depending upon what you're going for. I think that to start with, you should find a couple things that you can really master and that, you really understand how they work and what they're going to do. And then as you get comfortable with that, the process more of making the decisions of what you do with the tool, then once you really know how to use it, then I would maybe expand it out into some other options. Okay. So when I'm making a selection for something, let's say EQ, for example, I'm going to make a decision based on a couple things. What type of treatment am I looking for? Is it going to be like a broad adjustment? Am I just trying to put more air into the track? In which case I might go towards a Pultec EQ or an API EQ, where I really like the top end of those. Or there's a company called Mag that makes a really great EQ that has a nice top end shelf on it. But if I'm going to do more, what's the right word for that? But if I'm going to do more like surgical EQ, then I'm probably going to use like the FabFilter Pro Q or an SSL plugin or an SSL hardware unit. And for the reason of being able to, fine tune something a little bit more and really zero in on a frequency instead of having something set. But I know which tool I'm going to use because, I learned how to use the basic stuff that just came with Pro Tools, when it started, and knew the fundamentals of operating an EQ in general. So I think that's really good to start with. I think we might get a little too caught up in the importance of having every new piece of thing because we think it's going to make our track sound better. If you know what you're doing with the tools, you can, if you know how to use a hammer, right, you can hammer in a nail, whether that hammer costs $5 or $500. The hammer that costs $500 probably has, a more balanced weight to it, a smoother handle. You might not get as many blisters. You're not going to get any splinters on your hand. You're going to have maybe a smoother process in doing it. But either way, the nail's going to go into the wood. So I think that it's important for us to recognize that when we're getting started, to utilize the tools that we have at our disposal and be more focused on investing our time and resources into getting better, educating, research, and then expanding the tools as we get really comfortable with the technical practice of what we're using them for.
Yeah, many times I've found over the years that plugins, not like EQs and compressors, but a lot of the other plugins that I find myself gravitating towards help with the creative phase of the process. It's a different synth, it's a different processor, it's something that creates a sound or a particular effect, and it's like, oh, that's neat, and then that triggers thoughts for the creativity piece. Everything I need to do, I can pretty much do with the tools that came with Ableton, but I enjoy plugins for the creative ideas that they spark. Good for creativity, bad for my wallet.
Yeah, I would say that the whole Sound Toys library is probably for me the first, probably my first go-to collection of creative-based effects plugins that can definitely inspire creativity within something. And they just have so many different tools that do interesting things to audio. And I think from synth world, a kind of mainstay for everybody is Omnisphere. It's a good go-to. They have great presets to start with, and some really good options. I think that Nexus is another really great thing to dive into. Their libraries can get a little bit wild when you want to load it up with all the sounds that they offer, but it's another one where there's good sounds. And recently I started using the Roland Cloud, where you can access emulations of all of their vintage synths. and those things sound amazing and have definitely. I was working on a vintage project where we were recreating show tracks for a '90s band, and they were doing a tour, so we had to recreate these tracks because they didn't have the stems for everything. And fortunately, the artist remembered quite a bit of the pieces of equipment that they used to create the tracks. And so we were able to download the Rolling Cloud, and I could get the sound that they used from it without having to find that old piece of vintage hardware, which was really cool. But then through that process, I found some really unique plugins in there, and sounds that were very memorable, that just inspired a new direction with things. So I definitely would agree that it's great for creativity to explore new options with that sort of stuff.
Yeah, it was interesting. We talked about masterclass earlier, and I took Armin van Buren's masterclass last year. He's a huge trance artist, and I had thought that a good approach to producing was to begin with just a piano sound, because if you can create something that's interesting with a piano, it's probably going to sound even more interesting if you've got your basic chord structure and melody there. Be more interesting with a different sound. But it was interesting watching him, because the first thing he did was pick a synth patch, because he wanted to see how that synth patch interacted with the chords and the melody that he was playing. And so the synth patch was integral to the creative process for him, and done right up front. It wasn't a question of coming up with your chords and melodies and then picking the patch. Interesting to watch his workflow.
Yeah, the sounds can definitely direct, the creativity in that way, especially with synths, because a lot of times, especially when you're not necessarily just sound designing from just a wave form, but you're using a preset to start with, there's different pitch things that are built into it and modulation that's in there, and that movement within the sound that you're playing, that note or that collection of notes or chord is going to sound significantly different from one sound to the other. So if you find that sound, your part may end up transforming based on how it sounds being played through that sound. You might select different notes based on the resonance that's happening with it, or the way that the modulation happens, within the sound.
I want to at least touch on your process for mixing, because we didn't really delve into that last time. When somebody asks you to mix a project, can you give us a quick walkthrough of what you do and what your things you look out for, I guess?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the first things that I ask for is references. I want references for a couple of reasons. One is balance, different genres of music and then different subsets of genres of music often could have things balanced in a different way, where in one style, the vocal might be much more forward. And in another style, the bass might be more forward, or the drums, or the guitars, so the different elements within it. And then also to get an idea of how processed, especially when it gets into pop driven stuff, how processed does the artist want the vocal? How deep do they want the effects to be happening versus on the vocal versus the track itself? And just get a general idea of, the different, the different sort of sonic, the sonic, just to get a general idea of the different sonic character, that an artist might be into, within a track. And then once they give me some references, talk to them a bit more about, if they have any specific vision for the individual songs or for the record as a whole, if it's a single or if it's, a group of songs. Do they have any preconceived idea? Is there a rough mix that they're happy with the balance of? Like they like where it's sitting, but they just want it to sound more high fidelity. And then how much creative control do I have in the process? Are they going to be open to me muting something to be able to open up, the arrangement, or maybe changing out a sound on something if I think there's something that could help the track, fit better. So having really good communication on the front end to know what their vision is, what they have in mind for it, and then to get some sonic references, because it can be challenging sometimes for artists to be able to use the vocabulary that you're going to understand and how they're explaining, their music. But if we can have a sonic reference, then I can hear it, and then through listening to it, understand what type of treatment was done to that sound or that track to be able to get it there. oftentimes artists aren't really able to distinguish the difference between like reverb and delay, for example. And they might not know the right, there might be a certain type of reverb that they want to hear. It could be a plate or a chamber or hall or a room. And if they try to describe it, it might be hard to translate what they are intending to say through it. But if they give you a sonic example, then you can use your ears and your expertise to be able to get a feel for, where they want the track headed. And then as far as once I have a good understanding of the vision that the artist is going for, then it's just getting into the process. The first thing that I do is just listen to the song a few times, get comfortable understanding the arrangement and where it's going to go. And then in my head, I'm creating a sonic picture of what feels like it should stand out, what things feel like they might be masking each other, what things need more like surgical work and what things might need more creative work. And am I hearing any specific effects that could really like transform a certain section of the song? Just getting a feel for where it sits. And once I feel like I have a good feel for the track as a whole and where it needs to go, then I start by focusing on whatever the most essential element is in the song. And that's not always the drums. So, it could be traditionally said that, you kind of start a mix with the drums and get the foundation. But, in some cases there's just a magical vocal performance that really needs to be the spotlight. And the vocal is always going to be, front and center, but in some cases we might want other things around it to support it. And in other cases, the vocal might just be its own incredible lead instrument, on its own. So I want to know, where that sits. Sometimes it's tough for me to figure out how to set the balance of the drums and how heavy I might want, the kick versus the snare and where the hat should sit. If there's a bright, like plucky, like synth thing that's going through it, or if there's a real big piano sound, I want to make a decision about, or bass sound, make a decision about where the relationship is going to be and what's going to take, front and center. So as I'm listening to that song, I'm figuring out what's going to sort of cover the different fundamental frequencies of the different ranges of things. So if we look at like the bottom end of the track is the kick drum, and is there like a sub or an 808 sort of thing that's really pulsing in the sub frequencies in the bottom end? Or is the kick intended to be more of a mid-range, percussion and attack and punch sort of thing? And maybe there's this really thick sub bass that is supposed to cover, that end. And then you look at the synths and where they might sit, or the guitars and piano, other instruments that might be in the track, and where they have their sort of fundamental place that they're supposed to be in and how prominent should they be. So as I'm getting a vision for that, I'm making a determination about what elements I'm gonna start with. Once that foundational element is there, then I just start bringing in the next elements of the track based on what the next level of importance is. So if I'm starting in a more traditional way where the drums are the most important thing, then my next thing is probably going to be whatever that and the bass, and then whatever that main like rhythmic instrument is that sort of exists within the entire song. And then through that process, I'm always have the vocal at least sitting in a good spot, so I can be either listening to it through the whole thing, or depending upon the style of the song, I might be working on the track a bit and then bringing the vocal in and making sure it's still sitting right. But I definitely have found that it's often a challenging mix process if you wait to try to get the vocals in after you have this track like pristinely mixed, because there's certain harmonic frequencies within the vocal that you might have been covering up because that element wasn't in there. And now the track is so loud and you're trying to find a way to be able to find space for the vocal when the vocal is supposed to be the really important, driving force within it. So I always have that up. Sometimes it might be muted if I'm working on trying to get a groove to feel right or get a certain like energy in there. And I try to not solo things for very long, on their own, because you start maybe carving things out a bit too much where you take an energy, away from the track, and really need to hear it and make those decisions in context, with everything else that's happening. But that's sort of my basic foundational approach for how I get started with the mix.
Yeah, that sounds like a great, very logical approach. How do you avoid ear fatigue? I mean, we've all listened to tracks hundreds of times, and then it's, you get to a point where it's just like it all kind of sounds the same.
Well, I don't listen at very loud volumes. If I need to hear something loud in order to get a good reference, I'll do that for a moment, and then and then pull it back down. Make sure that I find a nice level that's loud enough but not too loud to listen to, because I'm going to be listening to this song for a while. I definitely take breaks. So I try to compartmentalize my mix process. Once I determine what those like priority elements are, I get say the main foundation of the track is going to be the drums and the bass. So I get the drums and bass sitting where they need to be, and then I might take a break for 5 minutes and just have silence, have my ears refreshed, and then come back to that, listen to it, make sure it's still sitting where it needs to, and then move on to the next element. I also prefer to mix in the morning when my ears are fresh. I haven't been listening to things all day. So I avoid like having like a tracking session where I'm cutting tracks all day and then trying to mix something at night after my ears have been really highly focused on sonic information and stuff for a long period of time. And then just, I don't know, listen to my ears. And when I start to feel like, man, I'm really not pinpointing those little elements as well as I could be right now, having something else to move on to and then come back to it when I need to, instead of trying to force myself through the process, which sometimes happens. And I also think that at least for me, I have to be in like a certain type of creative and focused frame of mind in order to get mixes that I'm really happy with on the first, run through. So I also try to schedule the time that I mix things around times where I'm going to have the most mental capacity. So for example, if I'm working on a record and I have 4 days of tracking and then 1 day left in the week, I'm not going to start mixing after I got done a different project after I got done tracking for 4 days. I'm going to find something else. I'm going to do some editing on that day. Maybe do something a little bit more low key, and then have, a day break in between, to where then the next day I haven't been as, highly focused on, listening so intently, to stuff. And then I can dive in with a little bit, fresher ears. When you're doing this full time and, 12, 14, 16 hours a day, you can definitely, battle with that, ear fatigue. And I found that just the combination between like listening volume, taking breaks, and then organizing your schedule in a way that is going to put your mixing time in the most effective time for you to work, I think is probably the keys for my process.
Okay. Do you find yourself trying to mix multiple songs sort of back to back, where, you might do a country song and an EDM song because they're different enough that your ears can sort of reset? Or do you always try to finish one song before you move on to the next?
Yeah, not typically. I typically just work on one song in a day. Okay. I get really hyper focused on the process, and I don't use any templates. I really like just starting from the ground up and not basing decisions off of a preconceived thing. I know there's a lot of people that work off of templates and do great work. I just personally find myself more fulfilled when I can start from the ground up with a clean slate and just paint the picture. So with that, I definitely take a good amount of time on a track to get the first mix together. So I like to just focus on one song, have one intention for the day when I'm going through that process. The only time where I would do more than one song would be if I was working on a record where it might be like a rock band or an Americana group or a blues artist or something like that. And the songs are all pretty similar sonically. They're just different songs, but they were tracked with a band live in a room. And then in those cases, sometimes I can work on a couple songs in a day and still feel, good with the process. Or if I'm mixing like a live concert, or something like that, or like an acoustic series or something, those sort of things. But I definitely wouldn't mix a country song and then an EDM song right after it in the same day. It's just too big of a different like mindset, and process to be in. And I don't want to be mixing that long either, to make sure that I'm just, my ears are fresh and, and focused. So I try to schedule my mixing time where I'm mixing like, the good portion of the day starting early in the morning. And then in the evening, I might have a vocal session come in or an overdub session or something like that. And then pick back up the next day with the next song. If I'm working on, a project, just try to organize the schedule that way.
Okay, terrific. Well, what are you, we're a little past New Year's resolutions, but what are you excited about for 2022? What's in the works for the record shop?
I'm really excited to just be able to continue to explore new ways to be valuable with artists. I know it's kind of like a generalized, sort of thing, but when I get too focused on like, I don't know, one specific thing or one specific like intention rather than the overall thing, I can get a little overwhelmed with myself about like that being, the thing. So I have very, very clear goals. But those goals I set more as like the impact of what we're going to do, as opposed to like one specific project or one specific thing. So I'm just really excited to be able to keep, expanding upon, the diversity of the type of work that we do, to be able to just keep things really interesting, and grow the business for us to be able to continue to really focus on projects that we love, and work with artists that we think are making a strong impact with the art that they're creating.
Well, that's terrific, and we'll have to have you back on in another year and see what new projects you've taken on and how the business has grown. And I know everybody's going to be really interested in hearing all of mixing advice you gave, and it's been a great episode. I really appreciate your time tonight, Gio.
Yeah, my pleasure. Great chatting with you, man, and I'm happy to be back anytime.
Sounds good. Where can people find the record shop online?
TheRecordShopNashville.com and Instagram at The Record Shop Studios.
Okay, perfect. All right, well, I'll have links in the show notes page, and thank you again. Have a terrific night.
Thanks, man. You too.
Thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with a friend, and don't forget to leave a rating and review wherever you're listening. And now, as promised, here's a sneak peek of my new track, Arigato, which will be out on all major platforms March 1st. Enjoy. And until next time, don't forget to be somebody's hero today.